I'm Martha, 32 female. I live in a quiet condo downtown, a minimalist space that I designed myself to be my sanctuary from the noise of the world. As an architect, I find peace in clean lines and solid foundations, things that make sense. My life has always been about structure and logic, a stark contrast to the chaotic, attention-seeking world of my younger sister, Victoria. For years, I thought our differences were just that, differences, until her wedding day, when I learned that in her world, I wasn't just different, I was non-essential. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My relationship with my sister, Victoria, has always been complicated. To our parents, she was the sun, and I was a planet in a distant, quiet orbit. She was the artist, the free spirit, the one who could charm anyone with a dazzling smile and a story, while I was the pragmatist, the planner, the one who made sure the bills were paid on time and the family emergencies were handled. I became an architect because I love building things that last. Victoria became a lifestyle blogger because she loves building an image that can be updated daily. She collected followers, I collected blueprints. For most of our lives, this dynamic worked, albeit with a quiet friction that only I seemed to feel. I loved her, of course. She was my sister. But being the responsible older sibling to a designated golden child is a thankless, invisible job. You're the scaffolding, essential for the construction, but dismantled and forgotten once the beautiful facade is complete. I was used to being the scaffolding. When she announced her engagement to David, a slick real estate agent whose teeth were as white as his portfolio was thin, I was cautiously happy for her. David was exactly her type, charming, ambitious, and obsessed with appearances. Their entire relationship unfolded on social media, a perfectly curated timeline of romantic getaways, sponsored dinners, and staged, candid moments. I played my part, clicking like and leaving supportive comments, just as a good sister should. The wedding planning, naturally, became Victoria's magnum opus. For 12 solid months, it was the only topic of conversation. Every family dinner, every phone call, revolved around floral arrangements, guest lists, and the thread count of the reception linens. She hired her best friend, Lauren, a budding event planner, which meant the two of them were a tornado of pastel color palettes and passive-aggressive emails. I offered to help genuinely. I could help with venue layouts, seating charts, and vendor logistics. My professional skills were for once directly applicable. "Oh, that's sweet, Martha," Victoria had said, patting my hand condescendingly, "but Lauren and I have a vision. It's more of a feeling and aesthetic. You're so technical." I was dismissed, relegated to the role of a silent benefactor. My parents, of course, expected me to contribute financially. As the stable one with a real career, it was my familial duty. They'd helped Victoria with the down payment on her condo and co-signed for her car, but when it came to the wedding, their funds were mysteriously tight. "You know how it is, sweetie," my mother had sighed. "We've done so much for her already. This is your chance to really show your sister you love her." So I did. I wrote a check for the caterer's deposit. I paid for her ridiculously expensive wedding dress as my gift. And for the actual wedding gift, I planned to give them something substantial, something that would truly help them start their life together. I decided on a check for $5,000. It was a significant amount for me, representing months of careful saving, but I reasoned it was for my sister. It was to help her build a foundation, something real beneath the glossy surface of her life. The wedding invitation arrived in a silk-lined box. It was ostentatious, of course, with gold foil and calligraphy that was barely legible. Tucked inside, along with the main invitation and RSVP card, was a smaller, elegantly printed card that read, "Additional information for our cherished guests." I scanned it. It detailed the dress code, garden formal, the unplugged ceremony policy, and directions to the sprawling vineyard estate they'd rented. Then I saw the final paragraph, a section titled Reception Tiers. My brow furrowed. "To ensure an intimate and exclusive experience," it read, "we have structured our reception to accommodate our guests in 2 distinct phases. Your assigned tier will be indicated upon arrival. We thank you for your understanding and can't wait to celebrate our special day with all of you. Reception tiers. It sounded like something you'd find at a music festival or a corporate conference, not a wedding. I called my mom, confused. "Oh, hun." "Don't worry about it," she said dismissively. "It's just one of Victoria's quirky ideas. You know how she is, always trying to be trendy. It's probably just for the plus ones or something." It felt strange, impersonal, and frankly, a little insulting. But I let it go. I was the sister, the maid of honor. Surely, I wouldn't be part of some second-class guest experience. I assumed it was for distant relatives or my parents' friends, a way to manage the crowd. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, the demands intensified. I was tasked with organizing the bridal shower, a logistical nightmare of coordinating Victoria's influencer friends who all seemed to have conflicting brand commitments. I ran errands, picked up alterations, and mediated disputes between Victoria and our mother about the frosting on the cake. Through it all, I felt a growing sense of distance, not just from the wedding planning, but from my sister herself. She was a bridezilla, but it was more than that. She looked at me not as her sister, but as a functionary, an item on her wedding to-do list. "Did you call the florist? Have you confirmed the transport? Don't forget to write your speech and please make it funny but not too long." There was never a thank you. Never a how are you? I was just another part of the scaffolding, and I was starting to feel the strain. The day before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, I gave her a small, personal gift, a silver locket with a picture of us as kids inside. She opened it, glanced at it for a moment, and said, "Cute. Can you make sure this gets put somewhere safe? I don't want to lose it." She handed it to Lauren without a second glance. That was when the first real crack appeared in my carefully constructed patience. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't just wedding stress. This was a deliberate, casual cruelty I had ignored for far too long, but I pushed the feeling down. Tomorrow was her wedding day. I would smile, wear the dress she picked, and give my speech. And I would hand her the envelope with the $5,000 check, my final, grand gesture of sisterly love, hoping it might just be enough to remind her that I was more than just useful. I was her family. I couldn't have been more wrong. The wedding day dawned bright and painfully beautiful. The vineyard estate was a portrait of rustic elegance, with rolling green hills and rows of grapevines stretching towards a hazy blue sky. Everything was perfect, just as Victoria had vision boarded for months. The air buzzed with nervous energy and the scent of 1,000 white roses. As maid of honor, my duties had started at 6 a.m. with a frantic steam cleaning of bridesmaid dresses, followed by a caffeine run, and then acting as a human shield between Victoria and our flustered mother. Victoria was in her element, a radiant queen directing her court. She looked stunning, I had to admit. The dress I'd paid for flowed around her like liquid silk. But her eyes held a glint of steel, a bride on a mission, and any deviation from her perfect plan was met with a sharp, cutting remark. I delivered my speech at the ceremony, a carefully balanced mix of heartwarming childhood anecdotes and well wishes for her and David. It earned a few sniffles from the older relatives and polite applause from the rest. I felt I'd done my duty. I had been the perfect sister, the supportive maid of honor. After the ceremony, guests began to move from the garden where the vows were exchanged towards the grand, barn-style building that would host the reception. A bottleneck formed at the entrance, where two ushers, dressed in crisp black suits, stood beside a small table. I noticed they were handing things out to guests as they checked their names off a list. As I got closer, I saw what they were: brightly colored wristbands. Neon green and a soft, pearlescent white. I saw our cousin get a white one. I saw one of David's colleagues get a white one. The process seemed odd, but I figured it was some quirky system for the open bar or meal choices. Lauren, the bridesmaid and event planner, stood behind the ushers with a clipboard, her expression a mask of smug efficiency. When I reached the front of the line with Aunt Helen, I gave the usher my name. "Martha," I said with a smile. He ran his finger down the list. "Ah, here you are." He picked up a wristband and held it out to me. It was neon green. He snapped it onto my wrist before I could react. The plastic felt cheap and cold against my skin. "And what's this for?" I asked, a little confused. The usher, a young man who looked barely out of his teens, avoided my eyes. Just for categorization, he mumbled. Please proceed. Aunt Helen gave her name next. The usher found her on the list and handed her a white wristband. She looked at my green one, then at her white one, and her brow furrowed in concern. What's the difference? She asked the usher directly, her librarian's voice cutting through the polit. E-chatter. Before he could answer, Lauren stepped forward, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. Helen, it's just a little system we have to make sure everyone has a wonderful time, she chirped. She then turned her gaze to me, and her smile tightened into a smirk. The white bands are for guests with reserved seating in the main reception hall. The green bands are for our other valued guests. My heart sank. Other guests? I repeated, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. Lauren's smirk widened. She leaned in as if sharing a secret, but her voice was loud enough for those around us to hear. It's for the non-essential guests, she said, her eyes glittering with malice. Victoria wanted to make sure the core group, her and David's real friends and important family, had enough space to mingle. It was getting so crowded. Non-essential. The word hit me like a physical blow. I looked down at the hideous, fluorescent green band around my wrist. It felt like a brand. I was the maid of honor. I was the bride's sister. I had poured thousands of dollars and countless hours into this day, and I was being categorized as non-essential. I looked over at Aunt Helen. Her face was a storm cloud of disbelief and anger. That is the most ridiculous, insulting thing I have ever heard, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Lauren just shrugged, unfazed. Victoria's day, Victoria's rules, she said before turning to the next guest. I was frozen, a wave of cold humiliation washing over me. People were starting to stare. I could hear snippets of whispers. The usher pointed me towards a side entrance. The green tier reception is on the outer patio, he said, still refusing to meet my eyes. There are bistro tables, a cash bar, and a speaker system to broadcast the speeches from inside. A cash bar. I was being sent to an overflow patio with a cash bar while the essential guests enjoyed the premium open bar and gourmet meal I had helped pay for. I numbly walked towards the patio entrance, my vision blurring. The patio was pleasant enough, but it was clearly the B-list area. It was populated by my parents' friends, some distant cousins, and a few of my own friends whom I'd been allowed to invite. Everyone was wearing a green wristband. Everyone looked confused and vaguely insulted. Through the large glass doors, I could see into the main hall. It was beautifully decorated with fairy lights and cascading floral arrangements. The tables were set with fine china and shimmering glassware, and seated among the laughing, celebrating guests were people I didn't even recognize. I saw Victoria's personal trainer clinking champagne glasses with David's boss. I saw her favorite barista from the coffee shop she frequents. I saw at least a dozen of her social media collaborators, people she'd met only a handful of times, but whose presence would look good on her Instagram feed. They all wore pristine white wristbands. The gym trainer got in. The coffee guy got in. But I, her sister, her maid of honor, was standing on the patio. I felt a surge of incandescent rage, so pure and hot it momentarily cleared the fog of shame. All the years of being the scaffolding, of being taken for granted, of being the quiet, reliable one while she soaked up the spotlight, it all coalesced into this one, singular, fluorescent green humiliation. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a mistake made by a stressed-out bride. This was a message deliberately and cruelly delivered. My value to her had been calculated, and I had been found wanting, non-essential. The word echoed in my head, a cruel taunt. I had been essential enough to pay for the dress, to fund the catering, to write a heartfelt speech, and to calm her nerves all morning. But when it came time to celebrate, I was disposable. I looked from the laughing core group inside to the cheap plastic band on my wrist. Something inside me, a support beam I didn't even know was there, finally snapped. The initial shock quickly hardened into a cold, diamond-hard clarity. I stood on that patio, the green tier, amidst a collection of equally bewildered guests. We were the wedding's outcasts, relegated to a space that felt more like a waiting room than a celebration. The music from the main hall was a muffled thump through the glass, a constant reminder of the party we weren't truly a part of. A speaker, perched precariously on a tripod in the corner, crackled to life. A tinny, distorted version of the DJ's voice announced the wedding party's grand entrance. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the procession. I saw Lauren, her bridesmaid dress shimmering, walk in on the arm of a groomsman, her face alight with triumph. Then, I watched my sister, Victoria, and her new husband, David, enter the hall to thunderous applause. They looked radiant, happy, and completely oblivious to the insult they had just dealt to a third of their guests, including Victoria's own sister. Aunt H. Hélène found me, her white wristband a stark contrast to my green one. She had a glass of champagne in one hand and a look of pure fury on her face. "I went inside to get this for you," she said, pushing the glass into my hand. "And to give your mother a piece of my mind. She's claiming she had no idea this was the plan." "And do you believe her?" I asked, my voice flat. Aunt Helen took a sip of her own drink. "Your mother is a master of plausible deniability, Martha. She sees only what she wants to see, and she has always seen Victoria as incapable of doing any real wrong. In her mind, this is probably just modern and edgy." She told me I was overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. This was a calculated, tiered system of humiliation, and Lauren's smug explanation had made that perfectly clear. This was about status. The essential guests were the ones who elevated Victoria's brand, her influencer friends, David's wealthy colleagues, even service providers who made her life feel more glamorous. We, the non-essentials, were the ones who knew her before the brand, the ones who provided real, unconditional support. And for that, we were punished. We were the background noise, the obligatory invites she couldn't get out of. My own friends, a small group of architects and engineers I'd known for years, found me by the sad-looking cash bar. They too were sporting green wristbands. "Hey, Martha," my friend Ben said, trying to keep his tone light. "So this is a choice. Did you know you were going to be on the B list at your own sister's wedding?" I shook my head, managing a weak, bitter smile. It was a surprise for me, too. They tried to make the best of it, buying a round of overpriced drinks and making jokes about starting our own, better party on the patio. But the mood was undeniably soured. We could see the main event unfolding like a silent movie through the glass. We watched them have their first dance. We watched them cut the 5-tiered cake. We watched my father give a gushing, heartfelt toast about his 2 beautiful daughters, and the irony was so thick I nearly choked on my champagne. From our patio, we could only hear a distorted version of his voice from the speaker. It was like we were listening to a radio broadcast from another, happier world. The ultimate sting came during the dinner service. Inside, waiters in crisp white jackets began serving a plated 3-course meal. We saw elegant salads, followed by what looked like filet mignon or sea bass, all accompanied by wine pairings. On the patio, a single buffet table was rolled out. On it were lukewarm mini quiches, a platter of wilting crudités with a sad bowl of ranch dip, and a pile of dry-looking chicken skewers. That was it. That was our dinner. The non-essential meal. Several guests just stared at it in disbelief. An older uncle of mine, a man who had known Victoria since she was a baby, just shook his head, turned around, and quietly left the wedding altogether. I couldn't blame him. I felt a deep, profound sadness settle over me, eclipsing even the anger. My entire life, I had tried to build a bridge to my sister, and here was the undeniable proof that the bridge only went one way. I existed to support her, to lift her up. My own feelings, my own dignity, were completely irrelevant. She didn't see me as a sister, she saw me as a resource. And apparently, that resource had been fully tapped. Aunt Helen, ever the pragmatist, was documenting. She discreetly took photos on her phone of my green wristband, of the sad buffet, of the segregated crowd on the patio looking in. "Just in case anyone tries to rewrite history later," she muttered, her eyes narrowed. "Just in case your mother tries to pretend this was all some big misunderstanding." The speeches from the main hall were broadcast over our speaker. When Lauren, the maid of honor's replacement in spirit if not in title, gave her speech, she gushed about her bestie Victoria. She told a story about a time Victoria had ruthlessly cut toxic people out of her life to protect her energy. The pointed remark hung in the air, clearly directed at anyone outside the glass walls who might be feeling hurt. It was then that I realized the full extent of the malice. This wasn't just poor planning or a misguided attempt at being exclusive. This was a power play. Victoria was curating her life, and that extended to her family. She was drawing a line in the sand, separating the people who were useful to her new, shiny image from the ones who were merely family. I looked down at the envelope in my purse. The gift. The $5,000 check that was supposed to be a foundation for her new life. A life where I was deemed non-essential. A life where I was worthy of a plastic wristband and a cold chicken skewer. The anger returned, colder and sharper this time. It was the precise, calculated anger of an architect who sees a structure built on a flawed, rotten foundation. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this structure was about to come tumbling down. My anger wasn't a hot, messy explosion. It was a cold, quiet engine that started humming to life. The architect in me took over. I needed data. I needed to understand the precise blueprint of this humiliation. Leaving my friends on the patio, I told them I was going to the restroom. Instead, I walked purposefully back towards the main entrance of the reception hall, my green wristband feeling like a challenge instead of a mark of shame. The two young ushers were gone, replaced by a single, bored-looking security guard. The table with the check-in list, however, was still there, tucked away near the coat check. The clipboard with the master list was lying right on top. Lauren's smug, efficient system was about to be turned against her. With a glance at the distracted guard, I walked over to the table as if I belonged there, picked up the clipboard, and slipped into the empty coat check room. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying as I began taking pictures of every single page of that guest list. It was all there in black and white under two neatly printed columns, main hall white tier and patio green tier. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. My initial observations were just the tip of the iceberg. Under the white tier, I saw the names of over 100 people. There was David's entire executive team from his real estate firm. There were Victoria's influencer friends, listed with their Instagram handles next to their names. There was her hairstylist, her makeup artist, her personal trainer, her dog walker. There were people from the local luxury car dealership where David had recently bought a car. It was a list of contacts, not a list of loved ones. It was a networking event disguised as a wedding reception. Then I scrolled through the green tier list. It was a roster of our history. It was our family. Uncles, aunts, and cousins who had driven hours to be there. My parents' oldest and dearest friends, the people who had babysat us as children. My own friends who had supported me through everything. And then my own name, Martha, sister maid of honor. The parenthetical felt like a punch to the gut. They knew exactly who I was and what my role was, and they had put me on this list anyway. This was premeditated. But the most damning evidence was the section next to the names. It was a column titled Gift Value Status. My blood ran cold. Next to each name in the white tier was a note. For the influencers, it said things like 500K followers, brand alignment, or post-wedding feature. For David's colleagues, it listed their job titles, CEO, senior partner. For others, there were actual dollar amounts, presumably from a gift registry or checks received in advance. It was a transactional ledger. Their entry to the main hall was based on their perceived value to the couple's social and financial portfolio. I scanned the green tier column for the same notes. Next to the names of our elderly relatives, it just said family. Next to my parents' friends, it said obligation. And next to my name, in Lauren's neat, sharp handwriting, were two words, paid for dress. That was it. That was my value. Not sister, not maid of honor. I was a transaction that had been completed. I had served my purpose, and my presence was no longer required in the inner circle. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a business merger, and the guests were categorized as assets or liabilities. Family, it seemed, was a liability. The unconditional love and support we offered had no quantifiable value in Victoria's world, so we were relegated to the cheap seats. I thought about the $5,000 check in my purse. Where would that have placed me? Would it have been enough to buy my way into the main hall? The thought was repulsive. My love and generosity were being weighed on the same scale as a sponsored Instagram post, and that was a scale I refused to be measured on. I took a few more pictures, making sure every detail was crystal clear, then placed the clipboard back on the table exactly as I'd found it. I walked back to the patio, the cold engine of my anger now revving. I found Aunt Helen, who was trying to console our great aunt, who was shivering in the evening chill. I pulled my aunt aside and showed her the pictures on my phone. She scrolled through them, her expression shifting from outrage to a kind of grim validation. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "I knew this was something ugly. To put a price on your family, Martha, this is monstrous." "What do I do?" I asked her, the question genuine. Part of me wanted to just leave, to vanish from this farce of a celebration and never speak to my sister again. Another part, the architect part that respected solid foundations and despised fraudulent facades, wanted to do more. I wanted to expose this. "Right now," Aunt Helen said, her gaze firm and clear, "you do nothing, you stay calm, you don't give them the satisfaction of a scene, but you hold on to this. This is your truth. Don't let anyone, especially not your mother, gaslight you into believing you misunderstood." Her advice was sound. A hysterical outburst would only make me look like the emotional, jealous older sister, a role my family was all too happy to cast me in. No, my response had to be as calculated and precise as their insult. It had to be structural. It had to bring the whole rotten building down. I rejoined my friends, my demeanor calm, my resolve forged into steel. I ate a dry chicken skewer and made small talk, all the while the images from the clipboard were burning in my mind. The DJ inside started playing upbeat dance music, and we could see the essential guests flooding the dance floor. Victoria was in the center of it all, laughing, her white dress twirling, a perfect bride in her perfect world, completely unaware of the tectonic shift that had just occurred. She had made a critical miscalculation. She had treated her sister like scaffolding, useful for a time, but ultimately disposable. She forgot that scaffolding is what holds everything up, and when you remove it, everything can come crashing down. The plan began to form in my mind with the clean, satisfying geometry of a blueprint. It wasn't born from a desire for petty revenge, but from a need for a reckoning. Victoria and David had turned a sacred family event into a cold, hard transaction. They had assigned a value to every single person in their lives. I decided to respond in the only language they seemed to understand, the language of money. I circulated on the patio, not as a victim, but as a quiet observer. I spoke to my relatives, to my parents' old friends. I listened to their hurt, their confusion, and their quiet dignity in the face of this bizarre and insulting situation. I was gathering support, not by complaining, but by validating their feelings. "Yes, it is strange, isn't it?" I'd say with a knowing look. "I'm just as confused as you are." Each conversation solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my personal humiliation, it was about defending the honor of everyone who had been dismissed as non-essential. The centerpiece of my plan was, of course, the envelope in my purse. The $5,000 check. It had been intended as a foundational gift, an investment in my sister's future. Now, it felt like a pending payment for services not rendered. It was an investment in a project that had proven to be structurally unsound. And as any good architect or investor knows, when a project is a bust, you recall your investment. I needed to retrieve it. The gift table was, naturally, located inside the main reception hall. Getting to it would be a challenge. I couldn't just walk in, my green wristband was a glaring stop sign. I needed a reason, a plausible excuse to bypass the security guard who was now more attentively watching the main door. My opportunity came when the wedding cake was being served. The staff was moving in and out, and the guests were distracted. I spotted my chance. I approached one of the catering staff, a young woman clearing plates. "Excuse me," I said with a polite but urgent tone. "I'm the maid of honor. I need to get to the gift table for a moment. The bride needs the something borrowed. It's in my purse, which is with our gifts." It was a flimsy lie, but delivered with confidence it might just work. I partially hid my green wristband with the sleeve of my dress. The young woman, harried and busy, just nodded. "The table is just inside to the right," she said, waving me through the service entrance she was using. I slipped inside. The difference in atmosphere was jarring. The air was warm, filled with laughter and music. The scent of cake and expensive perfume hung in the air. It was the party I was supposed to be at. I ignored the pang of hurt and focused on my mission. I kept my head down, moving along the wall to avoid drawing attention. The gift table was a mountain of beautifully wrapped boxes and crisp white envelopes. I quickly located the one I was looking for, a simple, elegant cardstock envelope with Victoria and David written in my own neat architectural script. My hands didn't even tremble as I picked it up and slipped it back into my purse. It felt not like theft, but like a reclamation. A refund for services not received. A withdrawal from a bank of affection that had just declared moral bankruptcy. As I turned to leave, I nearly collided with my mother. She was holding a piece of cake and her face was flushed with wine and forced merriment. "Martha, there you are, I was wondering where you'd gone." She didn't seem to notice that I wasn't supposed to be in there. Her white wristband looked perfectly at home. "Some of the older relatives are leaving," she continued, her voice a low, chiding whisper. "They feel a bit left out. You should really go and smooth things over. You're good at that." The casual way she delegated the emotional labor, even now, was breathtaking. I was expected to manage the feelings of the family members her other daughter had just publicly insulted. "I was just getting something," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Don't worry, Mom, I'll be handling it." My mother, satisfied with my compliance, patted my arm and turned back to the party. "Good, don't make a fuss, dear. It's Victoria's day." I slipped back out to the patio, the envelope a heavy, satisfying weight in my purse. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 required a more public stage. The DJ announced that the floor was open for dancing, but soon there would be the bouquet toss, followed by a final thank you from the bride and groom. That would be my moment. The moment when everyone from both tiers would be paying attention. Aunt Helen found me again. "Did you do it?" she asked quietly. I just nodded. A slow smile spread across her face. "Good," she said. "What's next?" "You might want to stand near the main doors," I told her. "And maybe get your camera ready." I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to scream or cry. Architects don't work with messy emotions. They work with precise, calculated actions that have clear and predictable consequences. My actions would be quiet, dignified, and absolutely devastating. I was going to take the blueprint of Victoria's carefully curated social hierarchy and tear it down the middle, right in front of her investors. I waited. I watched as Lauren practically tackled another bridesmaid to catch the bouquet. I watched as David awkwardly removed the garter. And then the moment arrived. The DJ handed the microphone to Victoria. She and David stood on the dance floor, bathed in a spotlight. "Thank you all so much for coming," she began, her voice overflowing with practiced emotion. "To our amazing, essential friends and family who are here in this room with us tonight, you mean the world to us." She pointedly did not mention the guests on the patio, who could only hear her disembodied voice crackling from the speaker. It was the final confirmation I needed. We weren't just forgotten, we were being deliberately erased from her perfect narrative. As she was winding down her speech, preparing to hand the microphone back, I made my move. I walked from the patio, through the now unattended main doors, and straight towards the gift table. I didn't run. I walked with the calm, unhurried pace of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This was not an act of impulse. This was a demolition. My footsteps were silent on the polished dance floor, but my presence was a sudden, jarring note in the carefully composed symphony of the reception. All eyes were on Victoria and David, basking in the glow of the spotlight. I walked directly past them, not giving them a glance, my focus entirely on the gift table at the edge of the room. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Who was this woman in a bridesmaid dress, with a neon green wristband, walking with such unnerving purpose? I could feel Victoria's eyes on me. I heard her falter mid-sentence in her thank you speech. "And we just feel so blessed to have you all." Her voice trailed off as she watched me. I reached the gift table. It was piled high with expensive-looking presents and a basket overflowing with envelopes. I paused for a moment, making sure I had everyone's attention. Then, I opened my purse and took out the simple cardstock envelope, the one containing my now-canceled gift. I placed it deliberately on the very top of the pile, then turned to face the room. Victoria had gone completely silent. The DJ, confused, let the background music fade out. The silence in the hall was absolute. Every guest, both inside and on the patio, was now staring at me. David looked bewildered, but Victoria's expression was curdling from confusion into fury. "Martha," she hissed into the microphone, her voice a sharp crackle that echoed through the hall and out to the speakers on the patio. "What do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned back to the gift table. With a slow, deliberate movement that felt like it was happening in another dimension, I reached out and picked up the exact same envelope I had just placed down. I held it up for a moment, then tucked it securely back into my purse. I then turned to face my sister. I didn't need a microphone. In the dead silence, my voice, calm and clear, carried across the room. "You said this was for essential guests," I said, my gaze locking with hers. I looked around and saw that even your gym trainer and your barista got to be in the main hall. I guess, as your sister and maid of honor, I didn't make the cut. A collective gasp went through the room. The white tier guests looked around, confused. The green tier guests, crowded in the doorways from the patio, were nodding, their expressions a mixture of vindication and shock. I then held up my wrist, displaying the fluorescent green band for all to see. I was given this wristband and told I was a non-essential guest. My gift was a check for $5,000. I paused, letting the number hang in the air. I just decided that my gift was non-essential, too. Good thing this wasn't essential to your big day either. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face had gone from red to a ghostly white, the perfectly rafted mask of the blissful bride had shattered, revealing the ugly, panicked reality beneath. She looked at David, at Lauren, at our parents, searching for someone to fix this, to rewind the last 30 seconds. But no one moved. They were all frozen, caught in the headlights of the truth I had just laid bare. Then she found her voice. It wasn't the sweet, lilting tone of her influencer persona. It was a raw, guttural shriek. "Martha," she screamed my name into the microphone, the sound blasting through the speakers with a burst of feedback that made everyone flinch. "How dare you? You are ruining my wedding." She started towards me, half stumbling off the low stage of the dance floor. "You are just jealous. You have always been jealous of me." David grabbed her arm, trying to hold her back, but she shook him off. "Give me that envelope," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That money is for us. You promised." This was the moment I had anticipated. The moment her carefully constructed image would be destroyed by her own greed and entitlement. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, my expression unreadable, as my sister, the beautiful bride, came charging after me, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage, yelling about money in front of all her essential guests. Aunt Helen stepped forward from the crowd. "That's enough, Victoria," she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a teacher who has dealt with 1,000 tantrums. "You have embarrassed this family enough for one night." Our mother rushed forward, not to me, but to Victoria, trying to soothe her. "SHH, sweetie, it's okay, let's not make a scene." But it was too late. The scene had been made. The ugly truth of the tiered reception, the guest list ledger, and the transactional nature of the entire event was now on full public display. The essential guests were looking at each other, their expressions shifting from amusement to discomfort to dawning realization. The influencers were discreetly checking their phones, probably already composing their narrative of the drama. David's boss looked deeply unimpressed. This was not the polished, high-status event they had been sold on. It was a cheap, petty family squabble. As Victoria continued to yell, her words dissolving into incoherent sobs of fury, I simply turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked calmly out of the reception hall, past the stunned guests, and out into the cool night air. I didn't look back. I could hear her still screaming my name, the sound echoing across the vineyard. It was the sound of a bridge not just burning, but being spectacularly dynamited. The drive home was quiet. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound and surreal sense of calm. I had expected to feel a storm of emotions, guilt, regret, even a triumphant glee. Instead, I felt empty. It was the quiet emptiness of a space after a demolition before the new construction begins. The dust was still settling. My phone started buzzing before I was even halfway home. It didn't stop for the next 48 hours. The first calls were from my mother. I ignored them. I knew what she would say. There would be accusations, guilt trips, and a complete refusal to acknowledge the catalyst for my actions. She would paint me as the villain, the jealous sister who couldn't stand to see her sibling happy. In her world, the appearance of family harmony was far more important than any actual harmony itself. Then came the texts from Victoria. They were a vile, escalating torrent of rage. They started with insults, calling me every name imaginable. Then they shifted to threats, promising to ruin my reputation. Finally, they devolved into desperate, greedy demands for the money. "You owe me that $5,000, Martha. You promised. That was for our honeymoon. You've ruined everything." The most interesting messages, however, came from other people. Aunt Helen called to check in, her voice filled with a mix of pride and concern. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," I told her, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "It was quite the spectacle," she said with a dry chuckle. "Your mother is trying to spin it as you having some sort of breakdown. It's not working. Too many people saw the wristbands. Too many people heard what Lauren said." It turned out Aunt Helen's discreet photos had made their way around the family text chains. The picture of the sad buffet next to a shot of the elegant plated dinners inside, the close-up of my green wristband, the evidence was undeniable. Most of the family, particularly the green-tier guests, were firmly on my side. They had felt the sting of the insult too, and my public stand had been a vindication for all of them. David, the groom, sent a single, terse text the next morning. "I hope you're happy. We've had to cancel our honeymoon." I replied with a simple, "You should have tiered your budget as effectively as you tiered your guests." He didn't respond. The real fallout, however, happened in the one arena Victoria truly cared about: social media. News of the tiered wedding spread like wildfire among her local influencer community. Someone, likely one of the essential guests who was more interested in drama than loyalty, had leaked the story. It was just too juicy to keep secret. The narrative was brutal. She was painted as a greedy, classless bride who had literally segregated her own family to make room for C-list internet celebrities. Her perfectly curated brand of aspirational living took a massive hit. The comments on her wedding posts turned from fawning congratulations to a tidal wave of criticism. Brands that had partnered with her for the wedding began to quietly distance themselves. The aesthetic she had built her career on was shattered by the ugly reality of her character. Lauren, the event planner, also faced consequences. Several potential clients who had been guests at the wedding and witnessed the fiasco promptly canceled their consultations with her. A reputation for creating a hostile and insulting environment is not exactly a selling point in the hospitality industry. A week later, my parents demanded a meeting. I agreed, but on neutral ground, a quiet coffee shop. They arrived looking exhausted and stressed. My mother started immediately. "Martha, what you did was unforgivable. You humiliated your sister on the most important day of her life." I just listened, sipping my coffee. I didn't argue. When she was finished, I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table, open to the picture I had taken of the guest list. I had highlighted the notes next to the names: 500K followers, CEO, obligation, and next to my own name, paid for dress. "She didn't just humiliate me, Mom," I said quietly. "She monetized us. She assigned a value to every person she's ever met and sorted us accordingly. She didn't see a sister, she saw a completed transaction. I didn't ruin her wedding, I just held up a mirror to it." My father, who had been silent, picked up the phone. I watched his face as he read the list. I saw a flicker of something, shame, maybe even understanding. He looked at my mother, then back at me, and for the first time, he seemed to see past the golden child narrative. He saw the truth of the blueprint. He didn't say anything, but I felt a subtle shift in the room. My relationship with my parents is still strained, but it's different. There's a new, grudging respect from my father and a confused silence from my mother. They can no longer comfortably inhabit the simple story where Victoria is the sun and I am a shadow. As for Victoria, I haven't spoken to her since. From what I hear from Aunt Helen, her life has become a frantic exercise in damage control. David's parents, who were also on the green tier, were apparently mortified and have significantly cooled their relationship with their new daughter-in-law. The perfect image is cracked beyond repair. I took the $5,000 and booked a 2-week trip to Spain to study the architecture. I walked through ancient cathedrals and marveled at structures that had stood for centuries, built on solid, honest foundations. I realized that my entire life I had been trying to be the foundation for someone else, someone who was content to build her life on sand. The wedding wasn't an end, it was a demolition. And now, I finally have the empty, quiet space to build something new just for myself. And this time, I'm the architect, the builder, and the essential occupant.